Thank you, Walid, for a really very interesting talk. Our last speaker is Professor Amal Jamal. Amal is from the Department of Political Science at Tel Aviv University, and he will be speaking about divergent trust in negotiation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ramzi. Thanks for those who decided to invite me to this conference. I feel like a strange bird in this context somehow. For a bit, being a political scientist first, and second, being a Palestinian from inside Israel. While the talk has been between Palestinians in the occupied territories and Israelis, Israeli Jews, which being an outsider sometimes gives you an opportunity to see things that other people don't see, which is good, which is not bad. So, and I would like to generalize actually what I'm saying about myself, generalize it about the Palestinians inside Israel. But I cannot do that before I thank the Israeli Foreign Minister Lieberman. I really can't do that because he gave me an opportunity, speaking about opportunities, making what I'm going to speak about very relevant, actually, as a result of his gesture a few days ago concerning population exchange, or in other words, revocation of citizenship from about 300,000 Palestinians, citizens of Israel, which means actually that the citizenship of the Palestinians in Israel is not taken by the state itself, is not taken seriously, which actually creates an uncertain situation, creates an existential uncertain situation that makes trust relevant, because trust is only relevant when things are uncertain. When things are certain, you don't need trust. If you know the result from the beginning, then trust is irrelevant. It's relevant only when there is something that is uncertain there, that could happen, that you don't know the results of, that could develop in various ways. And then you are willing or unwilling to commit or not commit, take a risk or not take a risk based on trust. Now, there is a lot of expectations here also. It depends how you look, what are the expectations from the environment concerning your location within it, within the setting, that makes trust relevant. So I usually don't deal with trust, which is conceived usually, something psychological. It's a psychological concept in its basic foundations. But I think it could be made into a political theory also. And that's what I'm going to try to do, actually, as an academic. I didn't negotiate with anybody, so I'm not going to speak like my predecessors. I'm going to speak like an academic, and try to understand, craft an understanding or different understanding of trust in my own way. And I'm going to proceed in various levels. So it's going to be making notes that will accumulate into an argument at the end of the day. But let me start with, back in the personal general location of the Palestinians in Israel, which are actually located in a structural setting that forms an opportunity as well as a risk. That is why trust is an important issue. And that's why I'm going to speak somehow about what I would call structural trust. We're not talking about personal trust, we're talking about structural trust, which means actually I'm talking about a theory that makes republicanist civic tradition very important, very necessary if we want to understand our reality. And since I said trust is relevant only in an ambiguous reality, where opportunities and risks are equally possible, we have to take into consideration what are the opportunities, what are the risks that people have to take, and I would like to take what's the negotiations taking place between the two sides seriously as a foundation, at least, for thinking about how we look at trust from the point of view of a national minority that is located within or locked in a situation where both sides proceed in negotiations promoting two-state solutions, meaning actually that the Palestinian citizens of Israel will be left out of both political communities. And this is very important. We are talking about a community caught in between two big we's. And I'm speaking about a we in the, in the Republican sense, meaning two republics will be established, two political communities will be established based on the negotiations in which Palestinians in Israel will be neither part of. And this is the situation actually we are talking about, and how you proceed in such a situation. I see it as an opportunity as well as a risk at the same time. And it depends how you look at the issue of trust, because if you talk about calculus trust, it could be an opportunity. If you look at trust as a psychological concept, it could be a risk, a very serious risk. This in-betweenness, I think, is very important. And I think we can elaborate this if you look at least what's going on, the process from the point of view of trust, etymologically. I think etymology here is very important, or what I would call, based on, of course, other people, hermeneutical circle, the hermeneutical circle. Or go back to the concept. What does it mean, actually, trust? And here I will connect with what Eli said before concerning the meaning of the concept. And sorry for using Arabic to elaborate this point, because I'm going to use the concept in Arabic. The concept that Eli spoke about is thiqa, trust. I think thiqa cannot stand alone as trust. I think we have to speak about what we call in Arabic i'timan. Okay? I'timan, which is very important. And it's different than thiqa. Although I'm going to speak about both. Thiqa is the regular meaning or the immediate meaning of trust, and the relationship between thiqa and the source and the root of the word is from wathaqa. Wathaqa in Arabic, and Ramzi knows better than myself. Wathaqa is not only to trust but also to tie. Yeah, to tie something. So it's tying something. When you speak about trust, actually you're not only speaking about reaching something that could lead to separation. It has to lead to tying things together, to crafting a new reality in which you feel comfortable, you feel part of. And I think this gap between, what's going on in the negotiations, in which the Palestinians in Israel feel they're going to be left out from both sides, they produce or would like to produce a different concept of trust, which will tie them to both communities, which will make them a gateway between the two communities, which will make them actually a certain type of a bridge. And I spoke on this podium, I spoke at the bridge one time before, in one of my talks. I spoke about the bridge, and the meaning of the bridge is actually that thing that defines the banks. A bank of a river doesn't have any meaning unless there is a bridge. This is a Heideggerian reading of a bridge. Actually, it's existential reading of a bridge. Bridge defines the banks of the river. And I think that's exactly the role when we talk about trust, that's exactly what we're talking about. That the tying together is going to be such that define both banks. And this is the only place where the Palestinians in Israel will feel comfortable to be part of the process. Otherwise, of course, they could play a completely different role. And since what's going on is actually putting them on either the shelf or risking everything they have gained so far, not as a favor of the Israeli state, neither of the Jewish society. They worked very hard to get to places where they are now. In the sense, despite the fact that their community was devastated in 1948, despite the fact that they lost all their sources of income as a result of confiscation policy of the Israeli government, despite that, they still managed to build themselves as a community within the on the margins of the Israeli economy, but still with a sense of confidence, with a sense of power that they are not willing to risk. And therefore, this tying process is very important. This is one dimension I think that is important to put on the table. The second has to do with the concept of itiman. Because itiman, I think it's a much broader concept. Itiman has to do with various things. First of all, the root of the word has to do with amn, with security. Okay? It has to do with security. You cannot speak about trust without being secure that, you know, the other side is going to behave in a way that could meet your expectations, or at least partially. This is one thing. This is a very important thing. The second was mentioned before and has to do with iman, with belief. Belief in the religious sense as well as in the social sense. And since we are speaking about a traditional community, I think it's very important to take the religious dimension into consideration. Why? Because when we are speaking about the negotiations, or what we talk about the relationship between the two communities, it's very difficult to see any way the Palestinians inside Israel, the President in general, I think, but the Palestinians in Israel could agree to a Jewish state unless we are talking about going beyond the two-state solution. Going beyond, which means going to one-state solution somehow, or speaking about civilizing the state. This is very important, which means it's neither me nor you that have religious, cultural identity anchored in the state exclusively. I think this is very important to take into consideration. This has to do with amn, which means security, and it has to do with belief, iman. But it has to do also with aman. Aman is a different form of security. If amn has to do with security in the militaristic sense, aman has to do with social tranquility. In other words, it has to do with being part not only of the state, and here the differentiation between Jewish state and Jewish society is very important, because the relationship of the Palestinian community in Israel is not only with the Jewish state, with the Israeli state in this sense. It has to do with the Jewish society. If the experience of the Palestinians inside Israel with the Jewish state very problematic, it's not less problematic with the Jewish society. And I think even if we speak about a certain process that has to do with the relationship between, the two communities as such, as Gemeinschafts, we have to pay attention to the difference between, social relations and political relations in on the level of the state. And I think it's very, very important. And here maybe I can elaborate a little bit about the we that has to be created, that has to be established, that is expected to be in the future. And there's no doubt that the concept of trust has to, at least based on Stomka, it has to do with what he calls futurism. It has to do with vision, in other words. It has to do with the future vision. What kind of political community is going to be created in the future? And am I part of it or not? I think this is one of the most important dimensions that we have to speak about, and therefore, Jewish state is actually automatically exclusive for the future, whereas a civic state could be inclusive, and it doesn't change anything actually about the legal reality within the two-state solution. In the sense that let's differentiate between a Jewish majority, Jewish self-determination within the Israeli state, and a Jewish state. This differentiation is very important when it comes to trust, when it comes to enabling a certain future development that will enable this community to feel comfortable, to feel it can let go for two-state solution or another agreed solution in the future. And we're talking actually about what I would call, or based of course on a long tradition, the Civic Republic, a Civic Republic. We're talking about civility actually. Civility as the access point which will establish equality as a foundation of the relationship between various parts of the political entity, and this actually opens up, despite the fact that what kind of future there's going to be is not clear, but the starting point guarantees that it will never be something exclusive to neither of the communities. Meaning that it's what Derrida would call democracy to come. Democracy to come, which means an open process. In the Popperian sense, it's an open process. It doesn't have an ultimate truth that is preemptively imposed on the process. It's an open future. But it has to be the guarantee that it will never be a future that it could become exclusive to neither of the communities. And I'm saying this because of the fear of the demographics within the Israeli mentality, within the Israeli, Israeli society. I think it's very, very important to take that into consideration. And I think here we have to bring in a concept, introduced by Anthony Gideons, the British political scientist, that has to do with ontological security or mental security. I think when we look at the Israeli discourse, Israel is a very strong state, militarily. But there is always a lot of fear, a lot of insecurity in the Israeli public sphere, in the Israeli mentality. And I think this has to be relaxed somehow, but it could be relaxed only if the Palestinians inside Israel could become a gateway to peace, could become the bridge to peace, and giving them this opportunity has to meet the preconditions I spoke about. I think this is very, has to be taken into consideration. Now, and I differentiated between state and society, and therefore, if I speak about civility, if I speak about, civic culture, civic state, we have to speak about social capital. Because we have to speak about not only the state and citizenship and legal status, but also the relationship between the Arab Palestinian community inside Israel and the Jewish society. And here we have to speak about social capital. Social capital, whether we take a Bourdieu's concept or we take Putnam's concept. Okay, it doesn't matter. In other words, whether we take Bourdieu's neo-Marxist understanding of social capital, which means elitist understanding, the elites can make bridges between themselves, or we take a Putnamian understanding, which is liberal understanding, which is more individualistic understanding of social capital. Social capital has to be built as an opportunity between the two communities, and therefore trust is important also in this regard. And tying the two things together is very, very important. It's very important, and therefore I come back to etymology. It's very important, hermeneutical circle. Again, when we look at the concept of trust in the Arabic meaning of it, i'timan, it has to do also with something else. It has to do, another synonym of thiqa, of trust in Arabic, has to do with responsibility. Responsibility. This is a very, very important. Who is going to take responsibility for the process? Who is part of the process? And here I think we have to speak about if trust is to be taken seriously, if it has to become relevant to any social process, I think responsibility has to be taken seriously into consideration. And here I think there is no way but to bring Hannah Arendt in. Yeah, we have to bring Hannah Arendt in. I think the way Hannah Arendt thinks about responsibility, the worldness of us, our worldness, our being part of, existentially, we cannot escape our reality as human beings. And therefore we have to be responsible for it. Otherwise, we're going to be responsible for ruining it. So we better admit our responsibility to it and take part, actively take part in crafting the future at some point. Of course, the demographic situation in Israel-Palestine is such that makes responsibility a very important and central dimension or meaning of trust that has to be taken into consideration. Another dimension of it, actually, when we speak about responsibility, I'm speaking about commitment, which is another meaning, of the concept of trust. It's a commitment. It's a commitment that has to be there. It's actually something that people have to commit to. And in order to examine how people are committed to such a reality, you have to look empirically at what's going on. And here, one of the most empirical dimensions of trust is custodianship. Custodianship. And here, for at least the Israelis among us who know, when we say, custodian for absentee property, it has to do with, could the custodian be trusted as to your future, as to your property, as to your location in a certain situation? Or, in other words, could the Israeli state, the way it is now, could this state be trusted as to the future location of the Palestinian community inside Israel? And the empirical experience in the last 65 years say no. There's no way. The only way this could, trust could be trusted as a custodian only when it transforms itself into a civic state. A civic state where, people feel equally secure inside the state. This is a very important process that has to be taken into consideration. Now, am I, envisioning something out of my fantasy, or am I saying something, utopian? Of course not. I'm not saying something utopian. I think when we read the future vision documents written by the leaders of the Arab community inside Israel back in 2006, 2007, when I read the political discourse of the influential intellectuals and political leaders inside the community, this is exactly what I read. This is exactly what I see. This is exactly where things are going. Now, having said that, does that mean that the Palestinian community inside Israel distrusts the Israeli state only? Or it distrusts also the Palestinian leadership in the occupied territories? This is very important to take into consideration. And I think maybe not equally, but they do show much of distrust vis-a-vis the Palestinian leadership. And here it could be divided into two. One is irrelevant to our discussion today. One is very relevant. The irrelevant dimension, shortly said, has to do with the way the Palestinian leadership has run the national entity established after Oslo since 1994 and until this very day. The way it was run, very badly. This is one step of trust. If the Palestinian state is going to look like this, we don't want a state. You hear it a lot. if the Palestinian state in the future is going to look like this, it doesn't make sense to be, an independent state. This is one thing. The other thing, which is less relevant to our context, but the most relevant, the more relevant actually, is has to do with how this leadership, this elite, envisions the future. And what Yossi Beilin said about this negotiator concerning demilitarizing the Palestinian state, at the first moment, it sounds like a joke out of hell, but it's very tragic. At the same time, it's very, very tragic in the sense that if Palestinians distrust themselves so much when it comes to sovereignty, when it comes to running their own life independently, then I think the echoes of this distrust reaches Yafa, Haifa, Lud, Ramle, Al-Fahim, Nasri, and so on and so on. Arab city towns and cities inside Israel. Meaning, it's not only in the negotiating room with Yossi Beilin or with other people. It's there. It's on the table, whether we admit it or not. How much time do I have? 3 minutes? 4 minutes? Okay. So I think it's there. It echoes there. And I think this, as I said, despite the fact that the distrust is not equally distributed between Israelis and Palestinians, I think it's there. It's there, and it has to be taken into consideration when it comes to trust. Or in other words, could the Israeli state be a custodian for, the future of the Palestinians inside Israel? The answer now is no. Could the Palestinian leadership be a custodian for the future of the Palestinians inside Israel? Here the no is much smaller. Is much smaller, which means the Palestinian community inside Israel does not trust both sides, not equally, as I said, and therefore the political behavior of this community makes trust relevant in the sense they view it as an opportunity, what's going on, they view it as a risk. And therefore, the extent of trust is very important. Here, my last point. And it has to do actually with a combination of Gideons' understanding of trust. And I don't know to what extent people are acquainted with Anthony Gideons, who wrote a book, many books, but one of them is The Consequences of Modernity back in 1988. And one of the things he spoke about is systemic trust. Systemic trust, in the sense that we live in a situation where most of the people we interact with, we don't know personally. And therefore, if we don't trust our banker, if we don't trust our bureaucrat, if we don't trust our professor, or we don't trust people whom we don't know very much, then we cannot live. Then we will go to the Hobbesian moment, which means waging a war against each other. Therefore, there is a need for a systemic trust. There is a need for a systemic trust. But in a tribal reality, like the Israeli-Palestinian reality, and it is tribal, reading Ibn Khaldun very well, and looking at Israeli political culture, and looking at Palestinian political culture, both behave like tribes, exactly. And living in such a situation, I think systemic trust cannot work without combining what he calls basic trust. Basic trust, meaning, basic trust, actually he relates like Friedrich Hegel, to the family. It's actually the altruistic relationship with the family members. This is the basic type of trust, meaning the willingness to give without having any revenue. And here, I think, because we are speaking about tribal reality, we need the basic trust between the two communities. Now, you may ask, wait a minute, systemic trust, basic trust, we need something to bridge between the two. And speaking a lot of the bridge, I think the third part, the third type of trust he speaks about can bridge the two levels. between, the very sophisticated systems that run our life in this region, the very sophisticated Israeli military corpus, on the one hand, and, the familial ties on the other side. I think basic trust and systemic trust has to be bridged by what he calls interpersonal mutual trust, or societal trust, or in Putnam's terms, social capital. Social capital. It has to be a bridge. And I think one of the things that we have to proceed, if we want to proceed actually, and bridge the gap between these two types of trusts, which exist to an extent, we have to move ahead with the manifestation of social capital, and that is civil society. I don't think that officials will reach a solution unless civil society takes a very serious role in imposing new models, imposing new reality, and imposing new patterns of thinking. And academia is part of this, but not only. I think what happened in Oslo, back in Oslo, and the fact that not officials have reached negotiations, serious negotiations, and a certain type of a model for the future, which tend to be not implemented, and that's why I thought to be bad, but I think it was very creative at that time. I think this one type of political behavior that we have to expect in our reality, which means we need a bridge between the officials from both sides in order to bring a solution in, and in order to translate basic trust and systemic trust into something that can bridge between the two communities. Thank you very much.